Hey there, guitar fanatics. Today we're going to be looking at one of the most important topics for guitarists that want to get really good at soloing and improvising, and that concept is intervals. And just why are intervals so important? If we can understand intervals, we can really start talking the language of music. If you're jamming with friends and somebody says, hey, we're going to play a 1-5-6-4 in the key of D. If you know intervals, that's all they have to tell you for you to be able to play that song with them. And developing your ear to be able to recognize intervals, well, that's the secret to being able to play by ear. To hear a song and just be able to pick up your guitar and play it, or to hear music in your head and be able to get it out through your fingers onto the fretboard. How do great guitarists know which notes to choose to make their solos as emotional and impactful as possible? Well, they know that if they use certain notes in certain combinations, those notes they choose are going to create certain emotions in the people that hear them. Knowing intervals will make you a better lead guitar player, it'll make you a better rhythm guitar player. Heck, it'll just make you a better musician. Let's get into it and play some guitar. A simple non-musical definition of the word interval is a space between two things or a gap. And actually, that's really similar to a broad definition of intervals in music. We can think of a musical interval as the space between any two notes, and we can define that space in half step or one fret movements on the guitar. But we also identify intervals by their place in a scale relative to the root note of that scale, usually the major scale. But we'll also take a look at the pentatonic scale today and how it's made up, and why the intervals that aren't in the pentatonic scale make it sound so airy and easy to listen to. Let's jump right in and break down not only the intervals of the major scale, but also the intervals between the notes of the major scale, because they're some of the most important and interesting notes that we can play. Let's use the C major scale because there aren't any sharps or flats in it. And for convenience, we're going to start off looking at it all on the A string. C is what we can call the root note, the one, or the tonic. And the root is the fundamental note that we build a scale or chord off of. It's also important to know that scales are built off of a specific formula of spaces between the notes. Starting on C, or the root, if we move up the neck 2 frets, what we would call 2 half steps or 1 whole step, we come to the second interval, the second note in the scale, and that would be D. Now moving from C to D or from the root to the second, it sounds like this. Now FYI, playing 2 intervals at the same time we call harmonic intervals. We're creating harmony like a choir, and if we play them separately, we call them melodic intervals. I guess that's because we're using them to create a melody. Getting to where you can recognize intervals just by hearing 2 different notes is the essence of ear training, and it's something you need to get a handle on if you're ever going to be good at learning songs by ear or transcribing solos without having to use tabs. Now, a great way to really get the sound of a scale interval in your head is to play it over the chord of the root note. In this case, it would be C major. Playing an interval over that chord gives you some sonic context, and it should also invoke some sort of an emotional response. For instance, when I hear D or the second played over a C root, it sounds to me like there's a question being asked. Like the soloist is asking the simple question, why? It's also described by some people as sounding unfinished, floating, and having a sense of curiosity. And this brings us to a real nugget of knowledge with the very first interval we come to other than the root. When we play the second over the root chord and it creates that unfinished feeling like we're being asked a question, it's because that note has a bit of tension to it, and we call that dissonance. Now here's the gold. If I move away from that note back to the root, the tension goes away or it's resolved. The root note feels like home. It's like the answer to our question. And we call that note consonant. When I say it's answer the question, when I hear the second, I feel like I'm being asked why, and when I go back to the root, I feel I may have just said, hey, because, some sort of an answer. But being able to create that tension at will, in other words, making your listeners feel different emotions at will, well, to me, that's the essence of why we play music. We'll talk more about that emotional content as we move through the different intervals. So let's get a move on. Now, the next interval we come to is the third, specifically the major third. In the key of C, that's going to be an E note. Now, the major third is going to sit 4 frets, or 4 half steps, or 2 whole steps above our root note of C. It's also a whole step above our second. If we play the major third over the root C, people describe that sound as happy, bright, sweet, content, or settled. It's even described as the sweetest sounding of all intervals. It's the interval that defines a major chord as major, and it has a minor counterpart that we'll get into that defines minor chords as minor. Now, the major third is what we call consonant, and it sounds settled. Listen to what it sounds like if I play the second over the root chord and then resolve it to the major third. And I'll even go back from the major third down to the root in this lick. Here's the amazing thing. We just played 3 notes, but because one of them was dissonant and the other 2 were consonant, it creates that tension and resolution, and it's a legit guitar lick, even though it's only 3 notes. I hope the light bulbs are going off in your heads. How about the next note, the 4th, or F in the key of C? Now, the 4th is only a half step or 1 fret above the major third, and there are only 2 half steps in the major scale, and they're both really important for creating emotion in your playing because they want so badly to resolve to the next nearest note. So the 4th, being a half step above the major third, wants really badly to resolve back down. The 4th also has a pretentious official name, the perfect 4th, because musicologists would say it's perfectly stable, pure, and complete when played against the root note. But like the second, it sounds sort of unfinished and unresolved. Now, to me, it's not asking as strong a question as the second, but it's still asking a question. It's kind of like, hey, do we really want to do this thing? And resolving from the 4th to the 3rd sounds like the answer, yeah, man, it's okay. Now, that unfinished floating sound being resolved is something we've heard a million times with suspended chords, like this D sus2 to D sus4. Both of those leave my ears looking for resolution, which we get by playing the plain old D chord with the major third on top. Now, that's a super simple example, but the fact that so many songwriters use that trick is a testament to the power of tension and resolution. Now, check out these licks using just 4 notes. We're going to use the root, the second, the third, and the 4th, and just how powerful those 4 notes can sound. We just did the same thing with guitar licks that songwriters do with that sus2, sus4 chord trick. How about the 5th interval, which is G in the key of C? The 5th is a whole step or 2 frets above the 4th. And we also know the fifth as the higher of two notes in a power chord. And the fact that when it's paired with the root note, it's called a power chord, well, that should tell us what kind of emotion that this note is associated with. People describe the fifth as expressing clarity, stability, and completeness. Now I'm going to play a couple of examples over the root C chord. Now from the first one, I'm just going to resolve from the fourth to the fifth. And then I'm going to play a couple of different licks where I use all the notes, the root through the fifth, to create melodies with some powerful tension and resolution. Check it out. Now the next interval in the major scale is the sixth, specifically the major sixth, and in the key of C, that's the A note. Now the sixth is a whole step above the fifth, and the sound of the sixth against the root has been described as warm and hopeful. And if I play the sixth with the root and resolve either down to the fifth or up to the octave, both of those movements make me feel like I'm kind of hoping to get some good news, and then I finally get it and I can breathe easy. Let me play a few licks over the backing track and I'll resolve from the sixth to the fifth, from the sixth to the octave, and then I'll play a longer lick that moves from the sixth all the way back down to the root using the different intervals for tension and resolution. Here we go. That brings us to the seventh, specifically the major seventh. And in the key of C, that's a B note. Now, regardless of the key we're playing in, the major seventh is going to sit 2 frets above the sixth and 1 fret below our octave. Now remember what I said about notes a half step apart and how there's a lot of potential for emotion because they want to resolve to the next nearest note so badly. Well, the major seventh is no exception. Here's B played against our C root. And people think that it evokes feelings of angst, anticipation, tension, bittersweet memories, and yearning. Check out these sounds over the backing track. First, I'm going to play just the major 7 resolving to the octave of the root, and then I'll play a lick where I use the major 7th, the octave, the 5th, the 6th, and I'm going to end up down on the major 3rd. There's a big range of intervals there, and you're going to hear a big range of emotions. Have a listen. So those are the notes of the major scale. And what about the notes in between those notes? For instance, we have the flat second, and that note is a half step above the root, and it's famous because of the theme to the movie Jaws. That interval, it's associated with anxiety, suspense, and discomfort, and giant killer sharks. Now, how about taking the major 3rd and flatting it 1 fret so it becomes the minor 3rd? That's how we make chords minor. Minor scales all have a minor 3rd. And that interval, it's associated with sadness, feelings of melancholy and introspection. And we do the same thing with the 5th. Let's take a C power chord and flatten the 5th 1 fret. And now we've got a super dissonant, angst-filled interval that was actually called the devil's interval at one time. And who hasn't heard this super spooky riff? We can take the major sixth and flatten it. We get the minor sixth, and against the root, it gives off a sound that people find mysterious and full of conflict. Now, we can play a lick that moves from the major sixth to the minor sixth before resolving to the fifth, and finally down to the root. And even if I only hang on that minor sixth for a brief time, it creates so much tension. Check this out. And that brings us to the minor seventh, which we get if we flatten the major seventh 1 fret. Now we're going to hear the minor seventh interval commonly in 2 chords. Dominant 7 chords. Here's C major. Here's C7 with that flat 7. And when used in that context, people hear it as playful, or it's been described as chill. We're also going to hear it in minor 7th chords. Here's plain C minor. Here's C minor 7. And in a minor 7th, people hear unresolved tension, longing, and even eeriness. And that takes us through all 12 intervals in Western music. Now, I did want to mention the pentatonic scale and why they sound as open and as airy as they do. The 2 notes that we drop from either the major or the minor scale to get major or minor pentatonic, well, that gives us a pair of 5-note scales with no half steps. And remember, we said that half steps are where real tension and emotion lies. In other words, in the major scale, we're going to drop the 4th and the major 7th to get major pentatonic. Without those 2 sources of tension, the major pentatonic scale sounds especially happy and upbeat. Check out what it sounds like if I play the 4th and the major 7th over the root note. Nasty, right? Now to get the minor pentatonic scale, we're going to take the minor scale and we're going to drop out the 2nd and the minor 6th. So again, we eliminate any half steps and their associated tension. So while minor pentatonic definitely sounds minor, it also sounds more open, airy, and less tense or angsty than the natural minor scale. Just some food for thought. So I hope you got a lot out of this video and you got some great ideas how to explore the fretboard and pick and choose notes to create emotional, expressive guitar licks. If you want to explore how Eddie Van Halen used his knowledge of intervals to create some of his best riffs, well then check out this video. Have fun playing that guitar, work hard, and I'll see you soon.